straight away to Ella, who is a postdoctoral research fellow on the project and who is prime responsibility for work package 3, or the work package that Queens was primarily involved in. So Ella has had this report to do that we're going to talk about afterwards. But there are 2 reports involved in this, weren't there? So there's the one on ICT and improving older people's lives, living conditions and environment. And you're going to talk generally about ICT and ageing well. Okay,
thank you very much, Cathy, and thank you very much for everyone to coming and giving us opportunity to share the results of our work. And especially for me, I've been in Belfast for a year and been working on this topic, so I'm delighted to have such a large audience to hear about what we have done. Thank you very much, Gamal, as well, for presenting the project and giving a good background to what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I will give a short overview of Work Package 3, what is about and what has been conducted, and then I will concentrate on discussing the main benefits of ICT technologies for aging well, and also talk about what the real content of this study is, about the risks and ethical concerns to do with use of technology for supporting aging well. And then I will conclude with some of the main findings and also recommendations that we came up for policy design and for practice. So the aim of the Work Package 3 was to carry out a comprehensive, interdisciplinary and intersectoral analysis of emerging social, demographic and epidemiological trends in ICT impacting on older people's living conditions and social environment, focusing on 3 technological applications domains, which were home care and ambient assisted living, a social web for older citizens, and e-health and telemedicine. I can tell you straight away, it's a really large topic, and condensing in 20 minutes presentation is very hard, so I really just flagged different things as I'm going along. There were 5 deliverables produced in the project before I arrived to work on the final report for Work Package 3. The first one was defining the overall problem and the action plan for the implementation of the work package. Then we had the report, very informative, very interesting report on business case studies, which Kamal already mentioned a little bit earlier about. Then we also had a report on ethical and regulatory issues related to social web and for older citizens. And one of the seconded researchers analyzed different social websites for older people in terms of their accessibility, in terms of their policies to do with privacy, data sharing and things like that. Then we also had the report on the ethical and policy implications of e-health and telemedicine, and I have to say it's a very interesting report and opens up so many more questions than it answers, but I'll mention a little bit about later. And finally, the final report was more concentrated on the actual housing and was about human issues related to housing design for elderly and smart homes. In terms of the methodology, the first deliverables, the thematic reports as I call them, they are based on the examination of a very wide range of literature, policy reports from the industry, academic literature as well, also on interviews, workshops, and for example, as I mentioned earlier, one of the thematic reports, also the researcher analyzed the different social websites according to different criteria. My job was to write the final report for the project and summarize all the findings and trying to answer a set of questions. Those questions were: to what extent is ICT able to help older people? Also, to what resource it can become to facilitate aging well at home and in the community. And also, there's a lot of fears about use of ICT producing, or more to the point, deepening social isolation, which is already one of the biggest problems for older people. So we try to focus a little bit on that question as well. And we also, one of the most challenging tasks for me was to assess the tenability of ethical and political tenability of EC standard definition of aging well. It's kind of hard to criticize or perhaps try to critically analyze the definition came up by a group of people at the European level, and just trying to assess it. So that was quite challenging but interesting, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but I invite you to read the report. And finally, to identify if there are any gaps in terms of policy and regulation. I produced the report, but one of the very important parts was to validate the report, to give it to critical evaluation to the experts, to the stakeholders, to both to academic community and also to people in the industry and people, especially older people as well, agencies and organizations representing older people's views. We've done it in 3 stages. First, we had 5 interviews with elite experts, and we have one of the experts here, Cathy. And we try to have, as you can see, from different European countries, to have European perspective, because I come from Poland, lived in Ireland for a long time, now moved to UK, very different systems, very different problems, very different approaches. So to get a good, I suppose, European perspective on things, as well as sectoral. Then we had a written consultation with 9 stakeholders. Some of them were actually oral, because I ended up talking to people rather than getting the written statements. One of the people, which I thought was very informative, we talked to people at the Commissioner for Older People here in Belfast, and they gave us a lot of very interesting ideas. And finally, we had the online public consultations where people could just read the report and comment on it through the questionnaire. And then the findings were fed to the final report, which is now available on the Queens's website. So now I'm going to move to the meat of the presentation. I'm trying to brief you about the benefits of ICT can bring for older people. I divided into topics, and the first one is security and safety. It's one of the main challenges for older people. I think there was a survey done in the UK a few years ago that the main problem or challenge for older people, I think it was over 60%, almost 70%, they say safety and security is one of the biggest challenges for them. At home, safety and security can be ensured by a set of sensors and remote controls, for example. It can be to do with access to the house, for example, if people are afraid of being burglared or someone uninvited coming over and there's a danger on that side. But also older people, a lot of them have memory problems or can sometimes don't pay attention to things. So sensors like, for example, whether there's a gas being turned on for a long time or the temperature is rising. So there are different sensors that can alert to what's happening at home. A very important part, and Kamal mentioned that, is falls among older people. And a lot of falls happen at home. And if there's no reaction, there's no help given, that can lead to very serious health implications for people getting pneumonia, broken hips. So it is very important to shorten the time from the fall to the help given. So alarms and fall detection technologies are very important part of that, and they're actually I think they're quite popular among older people, and they're not that expensive as well, which helps. And there are services, so for example, there's a network of care, so if someone pressed the button that they had a fall, or some of them automatically detect that the person is changed the position and is not getting up for a long time. So there's a lot of big data analyzing that behind. So it's basically allowing people to get help much quicker. There are also safer walking technologies, and some of them are quite controversial. For example, for people with wandering tendencies, people with memory problems, having GPS devices, being their carers to locate their location. Or, for example, when some people have boundaries they should be I suppose walking around, but if they cross those boundaries, the carer get alerted. There's a lot of controversy because it does impact. I had a chance to read some of that about what should be good, bad, and even people themselves who have the full mental capacity, kind of thinking about what would happen if they get older, if they get into that condition. So. But I don't want to spend too much time on it. And also, as Kamal already mentioned, there are different mobility applications, for example, for using public transport. Another thing which is very big, and it's going to get much bigger, it's home-based healthcare. The healthcare of elderly is a very big strain on public resources, especially financial resources, capacity, and care. So trying to move some of that home, there are already studies that prove that there is a very big financial gain, but also a good gain for emotional being of people who have chronic diseases and can be, instead of being cared at hospital, can be cared at home. So there are a lot of different systems out there that allow people with chronic conditions to be monitored at home, and if their state changes, the medical professionals are being alerted to it and they can react. There are also people who are not necessarily sick, but they may not feel well, older people who live on their own, that they can put their data into machines. Say, I'm not feeling well, so there's for trying to see their trends in their health, whether it's declining or it's stable. There are also a lot of different things, like you can measure your blood pressure, or you can some simple diagnostic things for measuring blood sugar, cholesterol, and things like that. My parents use, for example, blood pressure machine at home, and it helps them to kind of monitor what's happening. Also, it's important for people living in remote areas, and for example, islands where there's, especially south of Ireland, when there's loads of people living far away, they don't have the access sometimes to a doctor, so having that possibility is very important. And also, people who kind of, there's application of those different diagnostic tools can help people to become more aware of their health and better monitor and manage their diet, their lifestyle, their exercise, so they stay longer. So it's really improving their quality of life over time. There are also memory and physical abilities maintenance, so it's important for us to, like aging well is very much so about helping us to live longer in good health, in good cognitive health and physical health. And in terms of cognitive, I'm sure psychology representatives know more about it. It's about learning new skills, like computer skills. Web browsing is very important as well to stimulate brain activity. There are also specialized computerized packages that help people to improve their cognitive abilities and keep the brain more active, and therefore delaying the effects of aging. And similarly with the physical abilities, a few years ago there was a big thing about Wii, one of the game consoles, producing special games for older people to attract them to do some exercises at home. There are other projects like Vital Mind that specifically concentrate on that. So there's a lot of different examples of that, how it can be done. But also people who already have problems with memory or cognitive abilities and physical, their ICT can help there. For example, there are different memory prompts. One of the ones that I particularly like is, for example, script.station. If you are on medication, you can just scan your medication and the machine will tell you what medication it is, whether you should take it now, what quantities, and reminds you to take it as well. There are other similar, I suppose, specifically designed devices, but also simple things like computers or phones can be set to remind people about specific tasks, like birthdays or their doctor's visits. So there are different things that can help people who have the memory problems. And also physical assistant devices, and I know some of my colleagues here work with the exoskeletons or devices that help, for example, people who have stroke to recover through, like I have an example here of the exoskeleton Supergiant Hole developed in Japan. It helps people who have with mobility to work better, to bring back the muscles and bring back the body if it's possible, or in some cases to allow them to do tasks they wouldn't be able to. Also, robots is another way to assist people with physical abilities and remote sensors and controls, for example, in smart homes. Communication access to information services is the big thing. It's not only obviously for older people, but it's very important for the people who very often are retired, living on their own, and their contact with friends, family, and other people can be reduced because of their suddenly, especially when people retire, their circle suddenly gets smaller. So it's important to keep those connections alive, and especially in context of social isolation. So it's good for maintaining, extending social circles, exchange of information, hobbies, also communication with friends and family. A few years ago, I had the chance to speak to my grandmother over Skype. Over phone, it was almost impossible because she just didn't know how to use the phone properly. But with Skype, it was very natural. She could see me, she thought, okay, just look at the camera and talk, and it was very easy. So there's a lot of benefits, not only for older people, but for their relatives and friends. And obviously, it's important also easier access to information and services such as health information. And according to Eurostat, health information is the information sought most often by older people on the internet. Other increased, for example, there are increased opportunities for leisure, education, work opportunities. Like we often hear about older people embarking on new educational courses, or if people want to remain active, definitely ICT technologies can facilitate that much better. There are also companion robots for people living around in remote areas. There's a film recently, Frank and Robot, which was quite interesting portrayal of such a reality, potential reality. And also, especially important for patients with Alzheimer's, the mental commitment robots like Paro, which has great success in changing the mood of patients when they get agitated, to calm down and kind of to help them to, I suppose, get better, be more comfortable. So there's a lot of different, I'm sure this is not extensive version, I'm just trying to really give an overview. In terms of the risk and concerns with any technology we use, there's always the bad side, and it's about how we foresee and try to accommodate those, address those bad sides in the policy, in the regulation, implementation. Is very important. So I think the real value of this project is trying to identify those and communicate those early enough so something can be done about those concerns. So, as I painted a very nice picture of what ICT can do, the problem is still very accessibility. For things like communication technologies, or where they seem to be most spread and most useful, the lack of skills is very important. Only 63, out of Europeans aged between 65 and 74, 63% never use internet. Only 16% can perform 1 to 2 computer activities. So what those statistics say is that very few older people actually use internet and computer, so they cannot really use those benefits. Obviously, if you look at the older age group, those numbers are even smaller. That is going to change in the future, because the generations that are quite computer literate now, they are going to get older. So there's also older people are learning more and more about technology. But nonetheless, the lack of skill is still a very important question, and it's especially when we are talking about the provision of public services. We cannot assume that everybody can use it, but there's more and more being moved online, and the face-to-face contact is being diminished, but we are excluding a very large group of people in many cases. There's also limited access to hardware and software. There are issues of affordability in that case. There's also fear of technology. Some people are not comfortable to use, they don't have anyone who can help them. Some people, they feel no need for technology, they're happy as they are. And there's also the issue of remote locations. For example, broadband provision is not possible for many places in remote. It's fine if you live in the city, but if you live in rural areas somewhere far away, it's very difficult to get that. Then there's also, Gamal already mentioned, usability of services, about the fonts, the structure of websites that are just unreadable very often for older people, especially when they have problems with eyes or they can't hear very well. So there's, obviously that has a lot of risks for social justice and equality. Affordability is definitely a very important issue that needs to be addressed, because as we all know, there's a looming pension crisis in many European states, and the older people, for example in Poland, a lot of older people already have difficulties affording basic things like food, heat and medication. So will they be able to afford ICT technologies, which are still not cheap? There's issues around price, broadband provision and other equipment, and that has huge implications if we are trying to roll out telehealth and telemedicine. How we can afford it, who's going to pay for it? Again, there's huge implication for social justice and equality. Obviously another big field, and I'm not going to pretend I know that much about it, but that and privacy protection is very important. It's also a very important barrier for people to take on some of the technologies, because they don't know how their data will be used, how it's going to be shared, and there are issues around telehealth and telemedicine, smart homes. So there's a lot of data being collected, very often without our knowledge. We don't even know what's being collected and it's being used. And I think the scandal last year with Snowden, that shows how big kind of worms it is. So this is something that certainly needs to be looked much more further and needs to be addressed also in conversation with all the people. Social isolation, as I mentioned, is one of the bigger problems for elder generation, and has huge impact on emotional and physical life, as it very often causes depression. There's a big fear that especially social isolation, a lot of ICT technology have very positive impact. I talked about communications already, But the main fear is that the health monitoring and telemedicine is gonna remove the contact of patients with their medical professional. A lot of older people, they're very often going to a doctor or seeing the nurse is the only personal contact they have during the week. So if you remove that, that kind of removes a big part of their life. Obviously, this is a fear that has not been confirmed yet, but something that is being very strongly flagged up, because there's very few technologies that are being rolled out. There's very few doctors who actually see their patients remotely, so it's very difficult to say, but it's something that needs to be certainly addressed in the implementation of those services when they are rolled out. There's also digital exclusion. I love that picture portraying that we are trying, by moving a lot of public services online, we are very often not thinking about the older people who are often the only left in the waiting room, and that's something that certainly needs to be addressed, and we cannot assume that everybody is going to move to online services. I suppose with public organizations that they have much bigger care, but with the private organizations like banking, that is not necessarily the case. And a lot of voices, I've been trying to get a balanced view of the social isolation issue, and I think a lot of voices says that in truth, the ICT has a great potential to improve the situation, and maybe our fears are really futile here. Other things that I already mentioned, the loss of civil liberties, if we are talking about tracking devices, or there's also fear of overdependence of technology. If people start to use ICT too much, to rely on it too much, they may stop doing things for themselves, and that can actually cause negative effect on their health. There's also telehealth, like issue of being overwhelmed by technology. If you have all those devices at home, is this still your home, or is it kind of a hospital almost? There are also reliability issues, and I think with the climate change and the different things, like what happens if we have flooding or there's a power cut, if you have a person is dependent of the health monitoring equipment at home, what happens then? And I think what is very important is to remember that people have freedom, they should have choice and control. And Kamal touched on it. I'm not going to go into more detail, I have no time. Just summary of findings. I think it's in terms of the extent of ICT impacting all the people's living conditions, what we need to remember that it's very different for very different people, and it will differ depending on people's age, so different for people when they are 60 and 90 at the moment. Education, occupation, location, class, ICT skills, personal attitudes to learning the technology, it is very much so individual, and I think we are trying to generalize, but it's very difficult to do that. So I think if you are talking about policies and recommendations, we need to keep that in mind very strongly. Skills and access are important barrier now, but I think affordability going into the future will be a very strong barrier. Also, the impact of ICT on social isolation is an important concern, but I think, and I've said it a few times already, it is also a very positive thing. Obviously, the issue of access, skills and data privacy protection needs to be further addressed, and policy and regulatory measures are not adequate, and technology is changing really quickly, so it's difficult to catch up with that. And I think important concerns are raised around control, so it's about ability of all the users to control all the equipment and what's happening with the data that is being generated, and being able to turn off things, opt out of things. It's not like we often presume that it's good for everyone, but it's not, and we should respect that. And just very briefly, policy recommendations. I say the three, in my view, that are most important. That any policies or regulations should respect people's freedom to choose to opt in or out from any technology-based services. Also, the adoption of ICT solutions need to be part of the overall aging policies, and such policies should be devised in collaboration with all actors influencing all the person's ecosystem, especially carers. So ICT technology cannot be viewed on, it's part of the system and it has to be treated this way. And design of ICT solutions should address older people's needs, be aesthetically pleasant, and I think Amal touched on it, intuitive, not intrusive, and affordable. And if they cannot be affordable, how can we make sure that everybody should have the equal rights of access to it? I think I've already said that ICT has a great potential, but we have to remember about those risks. So it's time for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ella. I'm going to quickly give a brief summary of my thoughts on the report, and then we'll open it up to some questions and discussion, time permitting hopefully. But I think what Ella presented at the end there is probably the thing that struck me the most from reading the report, and it's that ICT solutions, with solutions being the operative word. Is it a solution? And if so, who's it a solution for? Is it a solution for the healthcare system, for the public services who have to pay the bills, or is it really truly a solution for the older person, and will it really truly add value to the quality of their life? And I think that's something, when I was reading this, it really came out to me, and I would recommend that everybody, I really enjoyed reading the report, particularly that second part on ICT and older adults. So Ella did a very nice overview of the adoption of ICT solutions, different types that there are for physical function, cognitive function, social and emotional life. My interest is particularly about ICT solutions that can help people move better, that can help reduce the risk of falls, but ones that are fun for older people, that aren't boring, that aren't whatever, that do add something else to the interaction with those. And I think one thing that came out there, and you talked about Skyping with your grandmother, is this emergence of technology. There tends to be this opinion that older adults are technophobes, they don't know how to do it, they don't know how to do things, and we have to show them or whatever. But no, I think there'll be technologies that will bubble to the top that older adults will adopt, and as you said, we're tomorrow's older adults, so we're going to be a bit more technologically savvy. And I think that critical thing, the ethical issues about imposing technology on people, that idea of telemonitoring and telehealth, that intrusion into somebody's life, that continually monitoring people when they don't necessarily want to be monitored. I have one personal experience where I have a member of the family who doesn't want to be monitored, and you have to respect those decisions. It's about empowering the person. The difference between passive and active ICT solutions, so the passive solutions being that continual monitoring, the smart homes, 24/7. But what do you do with that big data? Where is the information that's important in that data that will tell you the true state of the person? Yes, the fall detectors, but that's often too late. See one of my colleagues here, Kylis, who's interested very much in balance control in older adults. Surely it's better to prevent a fall than try to do it. Yes, they will fall, yes, there will be falls, but where should the focus really be on if we're really talking about improving the quality of somebody's life? Concept of aging, well, I learnt a lot about that. I didn't realise there was an easy definition, which is really quite interesting. And I think the first bit, I think more and more about with retirement ages increasing, and it's aging well at work. So staying active and productive for longer whilst experiencing better quality of life and work-life balance. So I think, all of us are going to be confronted with this, with retirement ages that are creeping towards 70. Can we really be expecting people to do the same as when they're 40, as when they're 65 or close to 70 years old? Then the aging well in the community, staying socially active and creative, improving quality of life and decreasing social isolation, can't pronounce that word. That was very interesting, the whole idea of the waiting room there, and that's something that came out here as well, that everybody seems to think ICT makes things better, but the whole telehealth, telemonitoring at home takes away a part of an older person's life where they have an appointment to keep, the bus journey to the hospital, the social encounters of the receptionist, the people they see in the waiting room, all those social interactions that we take for granted. But when they're not there, older adults can really feel that they miss them. We live in such, I suppose, a world where we're bombarded by social interactions, but we think for an older adult that lives alone somewhere and has something to do, but they just end up having a conversation with somebody maybe on the telephone. I just talked to some engineers this morning about companion robots. I have seen some of these things and I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you just not have a conversation with a normal person? Why would you create a robot that could speak to you when it's never going to be communicated, that it could be able to communicate at the level of sophistication that we as humans can, that even a 3-year-old child can? So, I mean, that's engineers going a bit crazy and trying to adopt, it's not really a solution for me, that. A conversation with a real human being is a solution there. So that was another very interesting thing there. And the last bit, aging well at home, enjoying a healthier and higher quality of daily life for longer, assisted by technology, while maintaining a high degree of independence, autonomy, and most importantly, dignity. I think that came across a lot in the report, that dignity element, and of course it permeates everything in healthcare now as people get older, and dignity and the rights that people do have. So those ethical and social issues I felt bubbled up very nicely. as well.